Hi everyone and welcome to the Remain Indoors podcast, where we'll be looking at some lighter news from around the internet, having a grumble when required, and talking about the ways we're keeping ourselves entertained at home. Remain indoors. I'm your host, Richard Spanners Ready, and I'm joined from all the way across that really big sea that I think is called the Atlantic, or let's go with that Atlantic map. What's the ocean between us? Pacific. Atlantic. I get confused.
It's the Atlantic, but specifically, I believe it's the North Atlantic.
North Atlantic. I don't know why I get my oceans confused. In fact, my general geography is bad. I know Americans get teased for their lack of geography, but mine's terrible.
I was going to make the somewhat ironic comment. They all pretty much look the same, but
they're all pretty blue. Because people just say across the pond, and that's really confusing. I'm like, what pond? Pacific? And no, it's not. It's the Atlantic. I know that now, and I know it forever. Oh, interesting times, buddy boy. We're not going to look at this from a massive kind of statewide, United States-wide geopolitical point of view. I want to know, buddy, are you okay? How are you holding up? Are you all right?
Yeah, we're doing okay. We're staying safe, and we're taking as much care of ourselves as one can under the current circumstances. So yeah, we're our little pocket of the world is fairly isolated from the larger goings on. Maybe I should just put it that way.
Good. Well, I'm glad you're holding up there, buddy. I just wanted to go back to Tuesday. Tuesday we were talking about dodgy aircraft. And
doesn't that seem like a week ago?
I know it does. And then a million aircraft stories came into my head. So I put a note down. So I did want to get to just one of the aircraft stories, because I often talk about how you should never get into helicopters, and helicopters are horrendous death traps, and I will never ever step in one again.
Well, you'd be glad to know, of all the many odd contraptions I've used to travel, never have I been in a helicopter. So I have followed your advice unwittingly.
They just it just can't work. There's too many things to go wrong. And in the movies, the bad guy, he's just like got a pistol and he shoots the rear spinny thing around, and then that just goes round and round. Once the rear spinny thing's gone, it's doomed. It just spins and crashes. And in fact, in any military film ever, the helicopter combines it. And there's a little bit of truth in that. Like looking at the Vietnam War, they lost loads of helicopters just to small arms fire. So just their guys on the ground with a pop bringing down an aircraft.
John McClintock in a chat goes, helicopters, 20,000 parts trying to get away from each other as fast as possible.
Yeah, no, I know. And honestly, I've never felt safe in it. And it's not like a plane. There doesn't seem to be that sustained, bit of flight where you go, oh, this is about right. Everything's feeling good now. It never settles. And the first time I got in a helicopter was a Puma military transport helicopter. And as we lined up, ready in all our kit, and it was just to go on an exercise. So we were being deployed to a training area where we would then hold that ground, and fake soldiers would come in and fire paintballs at us and all that good stuff. But we were lined up, and the pilot said, I think they're called pilots. Are they called pilots in helicopters, or death dealers? I don't know. I think pilots. But he goes, has anyone not been in a helicopter before? And I just went, yeah, all right. And I just put my hand up and went, yeah, I haven't. Everybody else went, oh, you idiot. And they were like genuinely annoyed at me, because the pilot then rubs his hands together and goes, we've got a new one, have we? And so he went into what is known as hedge hopping mode to try and, make my first helicopter experience a really kind of horrific one. And it was. So like the first thing about being in a helicopter is you're used to flying in a plane and you take off and you kind of gently ramp up and the ground gets slower, smaller underneath you. It's a gradual process. In a helicopter, it's just like a lift. So he just goes, woo, and you just go up in the air like a space lift, and it's just horrendous. And he starts spinning as well. And I'm taking it personally at this point, because I'm thinking, this is no way is this the normal operation of a helicopter. As he's going up, he's spinning it round and round as well, which isn't good. And then he goes into full hedge hopping mode. So that is where you come like right down to the hedge line, to the tree line, come back over it, go down, just trying to make everyone feel as sick as possible. And they all blamed me.
They did, because your admittance to being a total noob in helicopter flight was simply a challenge to the pilot to try and make you throw up before you got to your destination.
Yeah, and helicopters are just awful in so many ways. Like, I've dealt with, like, you've been on a ship and a helicopter comes in and it tries to drop stuff off, and you can't just then drop a bag of stuff from the helicopter. You have to earth it, and you have to earth the helicopter because it's a big spinning static generator. Awful things. So when they drop you off, they don't want to land. Like, they're just reluctant to land. So they're just like, out you go. They just hover a little bit off the ground, and they're like, out you go. You go, what? No, that can't be it. And then you get a little squawk off the radio going, okay, helicopter's leaving the position, form a defense, protect the helicopter as it takes off. And that was I tell you what, that was the last thing I wanted to do, was form even a pretend defense for that helicopter git face.
I can't blame you, because that sounds like the sort of fun that you should really only have in amusement parks when you've paid for it.
Anyway, helicopters are stupid. I tell you who's not stupid, our guest, our science man, Dr. Andrew Holding. How's it going, Doctor?
Good, thanks. How are you?
How's your helicopter experience? Have you been up in a whirlybird?
I've never been in a helicopter. I've been in a light aircraft and I've been in a glider. I think the worst thing is for those 6-people airplanes, they are death traps. They are horrible. Matt's nodding.
I spent half a year in a very small town in Kansas. They did have an airport, but the only planes that flew in and out were those little 6-passenger ones. And the airport was so small, and this would have been in the 90s or early 90s, that when I showed up, they didn't check my luggage. They said, "Can you carry that through to the plane for us, please?" and they're horrible because the planes weigh about as much as I do. So any wind at all makes them bounce. And this particular part of Kansas, southwest part of Kansas, suffers from sustained 50, 60 kilometer an hour winds throughout the entire springtime. And we were going back, it was Easter, I think it was. And we were going back, and so we would hop to Denver from this airport. And as we approach Denver, the pilot gets on and says, so I just want to go over with the people seated in the emergency exits that they do know how to operate the things, because there's a massive thunderstorm outside Denver.
What? It's up to you. It's up to you to operate it.
Yeah. You know how you sit in the emergency exit row in the plane, they come and they say, this is, are you capable of doing it? Well, this guy actually went over the instructions for doing it, and he said, there's a massive thunderstorm, so it might be a little bumpy. And it turns out that when a pilot says bumpy, what they mean is sustained vertical drops and lifts of 200 to 500 feet within seconds.
Yeah.
And it was one of these all the way down, and just like, he's like, oh, look, there's a hole, and the whole plane would go 90 degrees as he tried to maneuver between massive clouds. I was like, there might have been a point in my life where I enjoyed it, but not anymore. I do not want this to happen to me ever again.
Isn't Denver like one of the largest US airports, if not the largest one? So you're flying this tiny plane, whilst presumably disappearing between the equivalent of an ocean liner of the air coming past you.
Yeah. I was less worried about that than the fact that the clouds were, 50,000 feet and just pitch black. I mean, it really did. It looked like we were flying into the apocalypse as we approached the airport.
Did he switch the radio over to some appropriate music?
It's funny how much risk you're comfortable with when you're younger, as you say, Matt, because I definitely did have a kind of, YOLO, whatever. I'll, if this plane goes down, I'll just reorg in hell with the rest of my corps, all that kind of stupid stuff. But then as you get a bit older, like, you're invested in life, aren't you? You're like, oh, I've done well here, living this long. And like, I didn't care when I was 21, but now at like 35, I want to protect these memories, and I've got kids and stuff. I can't lose my stuff. Yeah, it's funny how that changes. I want to know about gliding, though. Gliding. I had a housemate who was a glider pilot, and for 3 years, he was trying to get me to go gliding with him. And my answer to him was, I have seen you unable to put a key in a door on a night out, and I've seen you try to eat things that are not food. You are not piloting me anywhere. Why were you in a glider?
Mainly because it was on offer in the local airfield. But they are amazing, because I don't know if you know how they launch. You basically tie a rope to the front of them. You radio someone, and they winch it in really, really fast. So then the thing takes off like a roller coaster. And then you have to release the cable, otherwise clearly you don't get pulled back down into the winch.
I don't like
and
that.
somehow they stay in the air despite the fact they don't have an engine. And that's the weirdest thing, is you're flying around.
Yeah.
I was doing this thing, and then you go, why is my altitude going up? Surely this should crash.
You weren't
this
flying.
doesn't make sense.
You weren't flying it.
I was flying it, yeah.
They just let you jump in.
There was a
and
guy in
fly
the back checking on me, but yeah, literally, I paid 10 quid, went up, flew around.
That doesn't seem like a thing you should just be able to have a go at. I don't know. Call me boring, Matt. Jeez.
Yeah. I had a friend, a Barry sax player, actually was a glider pilot, and he would show us videos, and it looks like awesome fun. I'm not so sure about letting people loose to fly the glider on their own. That would be sort of like, you've never driven a car before. Here, why don't you hop in a Formula One car? What could possibly go wrong? Just like, yeah, all sorts of things seem like they could go wrong very, very rapidly.
But there's a lot more space.
That's true.
I mean, you do go for a little course for like half an hour beforehand, which is look out for other planes, don't fly into them, and how to use your parachute, which led to the best moment of the entire day, which is we're sitting there and we went, and this is how you use your parachute, and the person next to me just went, what the? And yeah, he hadn't clicked that he
might have
a
to
parachute.
eject out of it. No.
Well, no, you don't get to eject. You slide the roof back, you climb out, and by that time you've already hit the ground because you don't actually fly that high.
Okay,
So
look.
They're totally useless.
So speaking of parachutes, either of you ever been parachuting?
Nope.
No. Now then. So, I've not been generally risk averse in my life. I've done the silly cliff jumps where you go, that's definitely not a good idea, and it's unsupervised, and I only did it because all the bigger boys were doing it, and I didn't want to get bullied. I remember we turned up as a company, as a battery at this cliff jumping site, and one of the older sergeants was there trying to tell everybody, he was going to go, look, lads, this isn't safe. You don't have to do it. Sometimes the braver man is the man that walks away. And he was like, he was saying it was all heartfelt, and he was genuinely trying to get us to not do it. And I think like one of the sergeant majors was like, don't be a fanny, don't be stupid. And that just like crushed it all. And I desperately didn't want to do it because there was like jaggedy edges on this thing. And if you didn't get enough clearance, you hit the thing. So you had to you had to jump off it. Like, you could get that wrong, and I really, really didn't want to do it, but I only did it because I didn't want to get grief, because that old sergeant, he was the only, I say old, he's probably about 33, he was the only one who didn't do it. And so that age-old question where they said, well, if all your friends jumped off a cliff, would you? The answer is yes, I definitely would, because of peer pressure. So anyway, I've not been risk-averse in general, but no, I've drawn the line at jumping out of a plane.
I see. So you were basically Team Lemming then?
Team Lemming, 100% Team Lemming. I was. Everyone, and I didn't like it. It's horrible. I would never do it again. So apparently, according to bystanders, I nearly didn't jump far enough. And as I was dropping, I heard a big ooh, and I didn't know what it was. But apparently, I only just missed the thing that's sticking out. And then, you hit the ground. You hit the ground, make yourself as small as possible. And then what you don't realise is how long you go down for. So, you just think, I'm splashing into the water, I'll come down. You could go down, you're going down for ages, and I look up, and you go, that is more water above me than I would ever imagine I would ever see. It's not like a swimming pool. And so you start going up. I didn't think to take a deep breath or whatever. You start going up, and you're going up for ages, and, there's still tons of water above you, and thinking, I'm going to drown, just trying to get back to the top.
This is hilarious because I'm now torn from so many directions, because I remember doing they had a cliff jump at a water park I went to, which was
nice,
only about 30 feet. And I'm like, well, okay.
That's enough.
I was with a friend of mine. Yeah, I'll do it. You get up to the edge and you look down and you're like, the 30 feet is actually, it looks a substantial distance once you get to the edge.
Yeah, 10 meter board.
Whatever.
Sure.
I used to dive off the high dive. I'll be fine. I know. You just jump in and land, feet first. But what you forget is gravity is 32 feet per second squared. So every 30 feet, you're falling for an entire second. And you'd be amazed at how long a second is when you're actually between the top and the bottom.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, the second is really a long time when you're falling, isn't it? It's a real surprise to me. But the weirdest thing is, do you know who has gone and jumped out of an actual viable airplane?
Tell me.
My wife.
Ugh. Okay, so she's done it and you haven't. Does she tease you for that?
Yeah, and I'm like, no way am I going, and no way am I jumping out of a plane, even if I had a parachute. Like, she's like, no, it's really amazing. I'm like, yeah, no, it's not amazing, and I refuse to do this thing. You're nuts.
So, I mean, I've bungee jumped off of a crane, and that was horrendous as well, because as you fall down, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to die. There's a chance I could die. Statistically, there's a chance this could fail, and I could die. And then the elastic catches you, and you go, brilliant, and you go all the way back, and you go, brilliant, I lived. But you go nearly all the way back to the top when you bounce. So you end up just doing like 4 bungee jumps. Stupid.
Yeah. Have you seen these catapult things that they have at the fair?
Yeah, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not. I don't even want to think about that. Let's go back. Dr.
What
Holding,
about
have you ever parachuted, Dr. Holding? Then were you prepared for this?
No, I've never parachuted. I don't want to jump out of a plane. It doesn't appeal to me at all. I quite like to go up there, have a look, but not jump out. It brings the ground to me too quickly. I need time to process the information.
You want to glide down, but the chat room are starting to talk about physics in the form of thermals, because they're a clever bunch, these. So when we were out hill walking the other day, we were watching what we believe is a red kite, a birdie, flappy birdie, going around hunting and stuff. And we believe using the thermals, because they didn't flap their wings for quite a while. Would you want to explain the science of thermals to us a bit? How does it work? How does it all work? All of it.
So there's a few things that birds do. So thermals is one of them, and that's just that as the sun heats up the ground, that heats up the air above it, and hot air rises. So you get this sort of effect where the air drifts upwards, and then it pulls in cold air from the bottom. You get these cycles. So that's what the birds are sort of gliding over. And if you're in a glider, as in the type of craft, you can sort of circle over these and slowly go up. But you also get all sorts of other things going on. If it's windy and there's a hillside, then that pushes the air over the hill. So you sort of get the wind speeding up to get over the smaller gap. A bit like if you stick your finger over the end of a hose and it squirts water out. And so all these things cause these airflows that mean that, yeah, you can just gain lift if you're light enough and you have big enough wings. And a lot of these really big birds actually mostly glide because it's quite a lot of energy to keep flapping.
Oh, nice. But you didn't all know any of that. Did you have the guy shouting behind you, all right, there's a thermal over that town or whatever?
No, because it was a test flight, a one-off thing. They kind of expected you just to go up and then lose all your altitude for being a terrible pilot.
Okay.
And then you would land. But actually what happened was I gained a lot of altitude because apparently I played too many computer games or something. So we then had to lose all this altitude quite rapidly to sort of dive into the runway. And what was quite funny is I mentioned to him that I just get a little bit confused how these things can go up when they don't have an engine and how they should just fall out of the sky. Because I get the science, but just like the idea that something needs an engine to go up just in my head is fixed. And he just said, oh, we'll try stalling it because we have this extra altitude. So
okay, what is stalling? What is stalling first?
Well, so you pull full back on the stick, and that then causes it to try and climb. But at a certain point, because you no longer got air flowing smoothly over the wings, they stop generating that lift that keeps you up. And at that point, it sort of drops out the air. And if you do this in like a fighter jet, it literally will just drop straight out.
Okay.
And you kind of get by that because you just put more thrust out the back of your plane. In a glider, actually, what happens is you lose that lift and it just drops and immediately catches itself and gives itself lift again because it just keeps falling back into that gliding pattern because it generates so much lift from these huge wings.
Yeah, they're big.
Of course, the reason why fighter jets don't have big wings is because if you want to turn quickly, the huge wings drag you through the air really slowly.
It's
good.
I think it's interesting that you can go and do that. I assumed you'd need more skill. It's interesting, the computer games thing. My old roommate used to play the flight simulator, and then at some point he just announced, "Oh, I'm going to go and get a pilot's license." And it was a really quick amount of time from playing computer games to being an EasyJet pilot. And I don't know if that's a particular thing about EasyJet, but I now know that this guy is an EasyJet pilot, and I'm like, oh my God, that's worrying. We could talk some science as well. We've already kind of got a head start on science. So let's go into some sciencey science, and then I'm going to ask you some dad stuff. Because you and I have got similar age kids, haven't we? So mine, 8 and 10. How old are yours?
They are 8 and 10.
Oh, 8 and 10. Okay, so maybe we can get some sage advice from Old Man Trumpets in a bit as well. Why don't we talk a bit of evolution to start with? Because I was trying to clumsily explain to the kids, where our base urges come from, hungry, poop, kiss and cuddle, all that kind of stuff. They're all curious about all that kind of thing. And my thing, maybe quite glibly, was I said to them, look, you're basically just a tube and you need to consume other tubes by putting it in one end. You take what you need to grow, and then you poop out the other end of the tube. And then that got me thinking, like, how accurate is that? And I was thinking, well, weren't all the early creatures tubes? And then I guess a stomach bit forms out of the tube. How close am I? Am I close, or am I just ruining my children's science education?
I mean, you're not too far wrong. You are basically the least tasty form of donut that exists.
Yeah, it's just things in and out. But this concept of evolution, we were chatting before we went live, and Matt just casually made the comment, "Ooh, controversial evolution." And, you made the interesting comment, well, it never used to be.
Yeah, so when it was first off put forward, most people were like, yeah, that's kind of okay, because they sort of went, well, God does things the way God does. That seems a way for God to do this. And the religious aspect was a lot lower key. What they didn't like, certainly in Victorian Britain, didn't like, was they were sort of all things bright and beautiful, happy, and then this idea that animals are tearing each other apart and evolving. That wasn't like, but the God aspect wasn't really relevant because they just accepted God did it all. So
right.
It doesn't matter how he did it.
The controversy now, there is no controversy. I'm not pretending there's a controversy. The controversy now from like young Earth creationists is that if they accept evolution as true, that must somehow necessarily disprove their Genesis stories, isn't it? That's where the opposition comes from.
Well, is it? I struggle with this because if you've actually, sounds very paranoid. If you read the Bible, and as someone who grew up in a Catholic family, we did. There are two stories of creation at the beginning of the Bible that contradict each other. So the Bible cannot be literal. Okay. If you got past the first X pages, I think it's about 20 pages. There's the Adam and Eve story everyone knows, and there's the other version, and then they don't match up. So this idea that it breaks creation it's frustrating because it doesn't even engage with the religion that I grew up in. Yeah. There are people also very, very tied to the Bible being literal, and they see this as an attack on them, but it's not. I mean, as I say, the original people who saw it just thought if God was going to work in a way, he would use evolution. And then you try and sort of say, well, is there controversy? Well, these people have to start denying dinosaurs exist. It's really hard to deny dinosaurs exist. You can claim that Satan put them there as a trap to mislead us. If you believe that, okay, there's not much I can do to prove it because you're going to make up anything to answer everything.
Yeah, okay, so I guess that really comes into the logical fallacy of special pleading, because it's not like if they had beforehand in their text, there was a text that said, and then Satan hid the dinosaurs or something like that. It was a direct response, Matt, wasn't it? And that's where though that kind of argument is quite weak. And by the way, this wasn't the intention to do evolution versus young Earth creationism. Sorry, just Matt for a sec.
No, I was just going to fundamentally agree with you that inherently you're talking about different systems of thinking. If you are someone who believes the Bible is literal, which, okay. If you're someone who believes the Bible is literal, then you're engaged in a kind of magical, realistic thinking that is impervious to evidence. Impervious to, because any evidence presented to you can simply, the magic sky fairy can immediately have been responsible for it, or the evil ground fairy can be responsible for simply putting the misleading thing there. And thus you can explain away any contradiction that should and probably does at some level trouble you if you have a modicum of intelligence and education.
Hang on. We don't want to get openly insulting to people. That wasn't my intention here at all. But as fans of science and supporters of science and an actual scientist here, we as a group here, I'm not speaking for you guys, but we're fairly satisfied at the moment. The evolution seems pretty like the soundest way to explain our origins, at least here on Earth. So I'm not going to make any, but you're free to believe whatever you want. From my point of view, I've seen more evidence for evolution than any other way of thinking or any other thing. And if you want to suggest some other better evidence, I'm genuinely listening, because, some of the religions sound just super and I would love them to be true. But Dr. Holding, we're talking about the science of it. And how these things evolved. I guess if we talk about belief systems a little bit more, didn't people used to believe that flies came from corpses?
Probably. I don't know that specific example, but the one I love is the geese that came from oysters. Because no one ever saw that geese, because they disappeared in the winter, people just assume that that's what they... So there's loads of things like this where people connected the dots wrongly. And there's still things like this we get wrong today. The one I love is, when you put your hand in the water, it goes all you like sit in a bath for a while, you
Goes
go all wrinkly.
wrinkly, yeah.
Why do you think that happens?
Because it's your internal timer telling you you've pampered yourself enough and it's time to get on with your day. Oh, and apparently Ian Erasmus suggests that it was barnacles, not oysters.
Yeah, I think it is a barnacle goose, yeah.
Okay, so what's going on with the finger thing then?
So what a lot of people do is and this includes, my colleagues who work in biology departments, they go, it's osmosis, this idea that if you put a cellular membrane in water, it sucks up water. Except that would be terrible, because if you stuck a person in water and they sucked up water, that would basically kill them.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. I thought I was generally waterproof. I always say to my kids, like when they go, "Oh, Dad, it's raining outside," I'm like, "Yeah, skin's waterproof. Just do what you want to do. Come back, change clothes."
Really waterproof. So this idea that you're sort of permeable to water, which it fits with the cellular models we learn at sort of GCSE biology. What's actually going on is you have a nerve response that causes this to happen when you go water. And there was a great post the other day actually on Reddit where someone had accidentally cut themselves and cut one of the nerves, and half their finger no longer had this response.
Oh, wow.
Because they cut into their finger. And they had never realized it. So they went to the doctor going, "What have I done to myself?" And they're like, "Oh no." And they Googled it and worked it out. But it's this wonderful because you can shut down the response and not go wrinkly because it's nervous. Not a good idea to cut your nerves for other reasons, and it's amazing how many people don't know that. And then we get like argument or discussion or whatever you want to call it. Then why do human beings do this? And the answer is we don't really know. It's presumed maybe to pick things up out of water. Maybe to catch fish, maybe something.
Well,
like
actually, I thought that was a joke, but in our chat room there, Hair Trigger suggested it was for extra grip, and now he's taking your credit. So, there's some. See, this is what I love about evolution: is it's clearly some people would think that we were designed to be perfect and find the perfect shape for the banana and all that kind of thing, but. We have all these vestigial things left over, which Matt, it just shows the beauty and complexity of these systems. Your body, it didn't solve a bunch of problems, but it put out all the different mutations, and then the mutation that happened to fit the current problem is the one to prevail, and you come up with all these weird and wonderful organisms, like fingers that get a bit grippier in the water.
One of my favorite things I ever saw, and I'm just going to provide a little bit of context. My dad is an actual scientist. He's an ecologist, and he worked at a major research institution. And when I entered high school, there was a big push, not for creationism, but they had morphed it into this thing called intelligent design. I don't know if you've heard of that over there.
Okay. Intelligent design is kind of like if you shoot down young Earth creationism, which, as Dr. Andrew has pointed out, you can do relatively easily by the actual text that's in the background. Clearly, your kids in the background finding that hilarious, Dr. Holding. But
sorry, are they coming over? Yeah, they are through two closed doors, but
no, it's fine. You can't help families. I've tried getting rid of them. There's no getting rid of them. But yeah, so given that it's a relatively difficult argument point to argue young Earth creationism, intelligent. What we call it, intelligent creation, is the kind
intelligent design.
Intelligent design was kind of a counter argument to that, which is a much more. I'm sure we'll both agree that we don't buy it, but it's a much more defensible position than just straight up new Earth creationism.
And my context for that was the following comment made by an engineer, which is like, anyone who wants to argue intelligent design with me needs to take a careful look at the human sinus. Because there is no way that thing is intelligently designed.
Do you concur, Dr. Holding? What's wrong with our sinus?
Well, my similar stupidly designed organ sort of checklist has the eye on it. Because if you look at the human eye, the retina, the nerves that receive the impulses are in front of the thing that detects the light. So that's why you have a blind spot, which is stupid. Why would you put the wiring in front of the camera? It's the most ridiculous way of solving it. And in evolution, it hasn't always used that solution. If you get a squid eye, it gets it the right way around. So squids have much better eyes than we do.
Oh, so it would be like having a phone camera, but some of the gubbins and the wiring is in front of the lens, and then you have to use a software solution. So there's a software solution in our brain that overcomes it?
Yep. Okay. So, and if you've ever come across these, you can get these pictures with like a cross and a circle, and if you look at the cross, the circle disappears because it's in your blind spot, and your brain goes, well, it's kind of white around here, so I'll cover it up.
Do you know what? I hate that my brain does that. I hate that my brain doesn't show me what I'm seeing. There should be a way to turn the filter off, because my brain doesn't show me what I'm seeing. Like, I think that I can see clearly, like in a 180-degree pan, but actually the things in my periphery, I can't see any of that, but it's just building a picture for me because it saw the bottle earlier. So, like, it's giving me a clear mental image of the bottle that's over there because I know it's there. Water, by the way, it's still a bit early. I hate that. I don't like that. I don't like, because nothing's real, because like your brain, and like, you know how unreliable eyewitness accounts are, and how unreliable people are when they're like trying to recall events. And all you are is the culmination of your memories. And you can't trust anything you remember, I guess, unless you do like a memento thing and write it down, like Dr. Holding, do not trust his Wi-Fi, etc. Picture that.
So, have you ever been a witness trying to do a lineup and actually identify someone?
No, I haven't, but I'm very confident I would be terrible at it.
So what annoyed me is I did this, and I knew who it was within about 5 seconds of walking in the room, because one guy looked totally guilty, and I was like,
what?
And he was just the only one who's nervous. He was, can't use that language on the show, but
yeah, please.
He was not in a good way. And then they're like, if you're not sure, you shouldn't say it. And I'm like, but if I give a guess and I'm right, it catches him. And we literally grabbed him in the building and pulled him to the floor. So, but it took 6 months before we did the lineup, and I couldn't remember him. And I was really honest and said, I think it's him, but I'm not sure. And they're like, yeah, it was him. It's like,
oh, yeah.
Unreliable. We need two people to identify it, but I don't know. I don't know if I made the right call. Maybe I should have just given it a go, and then they would have gone, good luck, well done.
But this is what I hate about our brains and our bodies, because we're only ever going to be one entity. We're the entity that is in our mind and that is saddled with this biological body until I get my robot body. I know it's coming until I get it. But yeah, I'm completely trapped by the evolutionary coincidences and foibles, and that left me with this brain that lies to me. It clearly wasn't designed for my day-to-day use. It was just the happenstance of being able to survive at certain individual steps in history. And so this is what I was trying to explain to the kids. Why do these things come about? At some point, the tube needed to hold the other tubes that it was eating and store them. So a part of the tube got fatter, and then randomly some of those tubes with the fatter bits would have some acid in it. And then before you know it, you've got a stomach. And it's really fascinating, but it's actually quite difficult. You probably do better than me. It's difficult to explain to children the kind of process, and because it's hard to imagine the scale it happens on.
I think the scale is something we all struggle with. It's so slow, and it's this process drawn over such a long time. These things can happen. But you look at something like a hand and you go, well, how did that evolve? And you can imagine it. You think all the different steps you get there. But then you find the way the genetics work is you can get a mutation that suddenly gives you an extra finger. Well, to me, what's incredible there is it's such a simple mutation to get a single extra working finger. Because it's not like the DNA is a nice, easy set of instructions. It is a gene just goes, oh, I'm going to accidentally duplicate a finger.
So it's just another line of code.
But it isn't. It's a regulatory system that's broken. So when you take the brakes off it, it goes and makes an extra finger because all the ways these patterns work. And actually, if you look at the ways hands are made, they're almost certainly a complex set of diffusion patterns. So, when you drop a colored dye into water, you see it drift out.
Yeah.
If you set the maths right, you end up with like oscillations occurring, a bit like, in a guitar scene, you get these standing waves. You can kind of describe the way the bone structure happens in your hand as a standing wave because it's sort of periodic. And this is really quite complex genetics, which people do not fully understand.
Yeah, I'm lost.
So once you sort of think of it as sort of a wave of standing wave of sound, that kind of oscillation can happen one extra time. And that's how you get a whole finger that actually fully works. And then the other stuff goes, well, I found a bone here, I should grow a muscle. But it's not an instruction book. It's a really roped together set of machines that somehow produce a solution. It's a bit, in engineering, your equivalent would be, when you walk in somewhere and 30 years they've been saying, we need to rebuild this, but we need to add one more thing to this bit of kit. And slowly you get this Frankenstein's monster of kit.
Oh, gosh, yeah, absolutely.
That is basically evolution. It doesn't ever rebuild it. It goes, well, can we tack this bit on here?
Yeah. If you recreated that system, it would never look like that. And actually, that was one of my big complaints with with some military systems as well that had been developed in that kind of way. And you went, geez, if you just tore away the book, it would be a third of the size. Matt?
I'm not going to mention Windows operating systems here at all. But I wanted to follow up a bit. And it's sort of, I don't know if it's my understanding from reading or just sort of, but if we go back far enough, if my understanding is correct, and I'm asking if it is, essentially we were all just bacterial colonies that had different specialties, and then sort of realized that if we cooperated as colonies, we could actually feed ourselves more carefully. And is that why we have all these different types of cells in our bodies, and why we have all these things that aren't designed? They came about by random chance. Like, oh, life has been on the planet so long, we've effectively been able to buy all the lottery tickets, therefore we won.
So, I mean, we win? That's the whole debate. We all like ourselves, so we kind of think we're really cool and wonderful. Actually, we're not the most successful form of life on this planet, and we're pretty good at trying to destroy ourselves at the moment due to climate change. And I'm not going to go to any other political thing there.
No. Just quickly, there was I was listening to the radio earlier, and there was a call-in thing, and someone said, what about climate change? And this lady went, "Oh, that's all mumbo jumbo," and the presenter didn't challenge. Just went, "Oh, you," and I was like, "No." Tell her she's stupid. In my opinion. Anyway, sorry, go on, carry on.
Yeah. So one of the strange things, if you go back, there is a last common universal ancestor called Luca. And that is amazing because it means all life on the planet seems to have come from one form of life. That doesn't mean that was the only type of life that existed, because what could have happened, there could have been many branches that died out and we don't know about. We're just, all the stuff that we found on this planet has a common ancestor. And then, as you say, some things became what you think of as bacteria. There's things more primitive than bacteria. And then things go down different routes. And of course, one of the big things that happened was oxygen respiration. And for that to happen first, photosynthesis had to happen. And that was another environmental disaster because most things died out that didn't like oxygen because it's this horribly toxic reactive thing.
But where Matt lost me there was saying about the colonies of bacteria. So did we all start as groups of bacteria? Is that correct?
Well, something a bit like what you think of bacteria. Bacteria have things that have made them evolve. Like many of them can photosynthesize, you can't. But what's interesting is you can find species that are halfway between us and, halfway between multicellular and monocellular. So have you come across slime molds?
No, but continue.
So slime mold, unsurprisingly, looks like a bit of mold that's slimy, and it sits there. But when it starts running out of food, it actually goes from being a single cellular organism, which is for slime, and it groups together and makes what looks like a little mushroom. And that then they come together and build this structure, which is actually an organ, and then make spores that spray out over the area. So it switches from being a single cellular organism to becoming a multicellular organism. And I think that's really cool and amazing.
It just makes you feel doesn't it just make you feel like scum, doesn't it? You just go, all these bacteria came together and made us what we are. But I'm when you say we only had one common ancestor, obviously then that branches off into things like plants because they can photosynthesize. And then when we get to kind of like the animal kingdom, like did the animal kingdom only emerge once as well? Was there like a small community of all these different types of life and they split off, or was there like separate independent branches of animal life, if that makes sense?
So animals generally are considered all the same branch. It gets a little complicated.
So there was like a first animal colony and we're all from that same village of animals.
Yeah, and the reason it gets complicated is because things like mitochondria are symbiotic things that sort of cross the branches, cross the stream. So some cell at some point went, I need to make energy, and swallowed up a bacterial cell. And that bacteria then became what we call an organelle, so a baby organ within the cell called the mitochondria. And that makes all your energy.
Oh, it's complicated, isn't it? I tell you what, you earn your money, Dr. Holder. I mean, this is your job, isn't it? You are a plant guy or something. No, cells, biology. You got a biology degree, didn't you, or something?
No.
But isn't that your job? So what's your degree?
So my research is breast cancer, and my degree actually is chemistry. And I just slowly drifted over to biology over time. So I've worked all the way from molecules through bacteria up to human cells. So I've done a bit of all of it. And it gives you an interesting perspective. Mostly the fact that you can't understand everything at the human level is something you just learn to deal with because it's far too complicated and it doesn't have a textbook.
It would be nice to have 1,000 lifetimes to start exploring this stuff, and a brain capable of doing that without getting distracted by a dog with a fluffy tail, etc. Okay, so to sort of, not to wrap this up, there's two things I wanted to ask about. I wanted to ask where viruses fit into this. Obviously, with coronavirus, the term gets thrown around. I don't really know what a virus is. Is it alive? Is it a thing? And then somewhere in my brain, I've got this slight nugget of information that viruses somehow get into our DNA. So what the hell is a virus?
It's a thing. So a virus is is it a bit of life is a good question. The answer is kind of not. If you look at the sort of requirements for what we consider something that's living, it needs to be able to do a lot of things on its own that viruses can't do. Viruses only really work once they get into a cell. And what they are is they're a little bit of RNA or DNA. So DNA is what your genome is made of.
Okay. So
RNA is what the messages that are read from the DNA are made of.
Okay.
And there are two different viruses. Some are RNA based, some are DNA based. And then what they have around that is usually some kind of packing material. It's usually a protein that makes a sphere or can make even more cool shapes to help infection. But the simple ones are basically a sphere shape with a string of DNA or RNA in the middle. And what happens is when they get into the cell, that RNA or DNA gets read by the cell thinking it's a correct instruction.
Oh, okay.
And that then causes a problem.
Okay, so it slips into like the DNA code, and then the body and everything reacts or treats it as if it is part of that. And I guess if that reproduces, that then continues down that evolutionary line.
Yeah, and some viruses, as you sort of hinted at, they contain the code for a bit of machinery that can convert the RNA back into DNA and then copy that into your genome. And that means that cell then has a copy of it. And if that cell is in your gametes, so the bits you use to reproduce, your children will have a copy of that virus too. And our genome is littered with viruses and littered with evolutionary steps to keep those viruses switched off.
Oh, right. So I guess, having the virus as part of your thing might be bad. So if you have a mutation that then lets you turn that instruction off, you're more likely to prevail and live long enough to procreate and everything like that. So, wow, that's a lot. It's quite complicated, that, isn't it? Tell us your yeast thing, because you told me earlier that yeast and mold, yeast will somehow help me explain this to my kids, or no?
That was more when we were talking
about the slime
evolution.
thing.
So slime molds are one of them. Yeast is another species so the really key experiments done in yeast, a guy called Paul Nurse, he looked at cell cycle in yeast and found that actually most of the human cell cycle can be recapitulated in yeast. And the amazing experiment they did was they found they were making these mutants. And of course, it's very easy to make mutants of yeast because they're single cellular. And if you use the type of yeast he was, as they go through cell cycle, they just grow longer. And when they get sort of double the original length, they split into two. And they just keep doing that. And they made versions that didn't get as long or didn't get as big. And one of them they found they could basically rescue by copying a human gene and putting that into the yeast, and it recovered it. And the yeast was unhappy again, running cell cycle off human genes.
So it's like a hybrid, like a what do you call it?
Hybrid human yeast chimera.
It's like a Z-donk, but with yeast and
one
humans.
gene.
Yeah, that's all right, isn't it? It's mental. Anyway, I hope you guys listening to this are enjoying it. I love this kind of thing for you can just let it wash over you as passing information, or B, you can use it as a launch pad to go and do further reading. So I always like that kind of thing. Matt, what's up?
Well, this is now you're talking about putting the human genomes in. Is that not a process that is used to create things like insulin for pharmaceutical companies? And speaking of such things, I recall reading about bacteria being able to communicate antibiotic resistance amongst themselves. And at what point does this become proof of evolution as or natural selection, I suppose I should say, as a mechanism that drives the growth and development of organisms? That I'm always surprised, because you always see the medical doctors saying there's no such thing as evolution because of their beliefs. But I'm like, but antibiotic resistance, surely that is a thing that would make you go, oh, well, except for in this instance. So is that a legitimate understanding of resistance and And yeah, so there you go.
Yeah.
There are
So
my
what was your
99
first question
questions.
again? So the second bit was bacterial resistance. The first bit was
Yeah. Well,
I
he was
forgot
attacking. He was attacking creationists again. But
Okay, right.
stick to the first bit.
So the second bit I can come in. So
Dimly.
bacteria can communicate, not just resistance, but there's a thing called quorum sensing. So what they do is they put out a chemical, and if that chemical gets into other bacteria, that turns on or turns off a gene. And when the concentration of that chemical gets high enough, because they're dense, so like when the population is growing high enough, they might suddenly dump a load of toxin, and that kills the host. And that's an evolutionary process that they worked out to work together. Which, when it came out, was absolutely radical. The idea that bacteria could work together. The way they transmit resistance to antibiotics is slightly different. Bacteria are genetically much more simple than what humans have, and the whole system that deals with genetics is much simpler. So in a bacteria, genes are nearly always in. So if there's a gene cluster for an antibiotic resistance, it will be kept together, where humans do all sorts of horrible things with their genes because we don't transfer genes as often. And basically, there's a load of mechanisms that bacteria have that to take that gene from one bacteria to another. And that's just called horizontal transfer. And there's a lot of ways that can happen. But really, when we're talking about antibiotic resistance, what we're saying is if they sort of spray these genes out a bit, if something else picks it up, then it becomes resistant. So when you give it antibiotics, it doesn't die. And that isn't seen by the people you're talking about as evolution. Because what they see that is just natural selection. They pick up a gene and it works. Where evolution would be that the gene gradually evolves from another gene, which is exactly what happens anyway. So one of the resistance mechanisms I studied in my past was a bacteria which changes how it builds its cell wall. And it just literally changed one small bit, and that meant the drugs couldn't bind to it anymore. And it was a really trivial thing. So you find actually we do have examples of this. They're not the things you're talking about. The really cool one is they grew bacteria on a food source which was really low in one nutrient, and they did it for about 20 years and managed to get E. coli to re-evolve the ability to use a new food source.
I mean, that's fascinating, but I've just been giggling to myself since you said horizontal transfer.
I mean, I avoided using the word pilus, which is highly important as well.
A quick one, Max. We're going to move on in a bit.
Happily, in that lovely and brilliant explanation, I remember my initial question, which was, do we not put genes into bacteria and yeast in order to generate things like insulin for people now?
Yes, we do it all the time. I mean, it's a really useful tool in the lab. This brings us to the whole genetic modification discussion. And the E. coli we use for those kind of experiments have basically had all the genes removed, so they shouldn't be able to grow outside the lab. And there's a whole load of discussions that we don't have time to go over about the ethics and the safety of that, but generally it's accepted that is safe. And what's great about that is insulin basically required killing a lot of pigs. And now you can basically take insulin, which is a really short gene, put it into a bacteria and make bucket loads of the stuff very cheap and save lives. And if you're a kind of person who for some reason has an ethical issue with killing lots of pigs, which for the whole host of reasons there are, it means you can now kill bacteria instead for it, which most people are quite happy to do.
Whoa. I say, save the bacteria. You're horrible people. Tell you who's nice people. It's our live chat room who comes and joins us, not just the podcast. We do this live with a video version as well. And I always watch the figures of the live stream to see how many people we have. And I've realized over the years that, if we're dragging on, if the pacing is bad, we tend to lose a big chunk of people. So I have evolved over the years to respond and have my pacing match what keeps people interested in what people want to listen to. And no people, not a single soul dropped out during your bacteria explanation. So I just want to call the chat room nerds. I 100% fell asleep.
I thought you were going to say half of them dropped out during my question, however.
No, they're all mega nerds. Don't be offended. You're nerds. Anyway, a fantastic audience in the live stream here. Glad you guys have been keeping us company during lockdown. I think we're settled currently on 2 days a week, so we're doing Tuesday and Thursday. I had a little break from radio duty. Wasn't my fault. Horrible scheduling, just fafu, which meant I moved to a Saturday evening slot, and then that slot suddenly became unavailable for reasons out of control of the station. But I am now going to be back on air on Sunday mornings. I won't say yet, but I'm going to be back on air. I'm going to be on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire, so you can catch me there. But it just does mean that I'm sort of losing a day's worth of project time. So Tuesdays and Thursdays is what we're going to aim for at the moment. A bit of telly stuff. Since you're here, this is sort of sciencey related, Dr. Holding. I have binged my way through. Space Force. Have you caught Space Force?
I have seen the first 2 episodes, including the humorous monkey moments.
Oh, okay. So you've seen Matt. Have you watched Space Force at all? Okay,
Not yet. No.
it's
It's a
Steve.
chimpanzee as well.
Steve Carell from The Office is an Air Force general, and by the way, I completely recommend this. It's ridiculous, but it's one of those things. Yes, it is going to be farcical. Yes, the premise is a little odd. It's a little way into the future, but the characters are great. Like, you can be absorbed. You care about the characters, and it's funny. And it's John Malkovich is the lead scientist at this Space Force Center. I've forgotten. Steve Carell is basically an Air Force general who gets made the commander of the brand new Space Force because the president, who they're highly inferring is a Trump-like character, has on a whim decided he wants boots on the moon, and he wants like military boots on the moon. So this is him for 10 episodes trying to get and establish a military colony on the moon. Leah Hunt says the first episode was bad and it gets better. Oh, I didn't think it was bad, but yeah, it does get better as you go through. But what's great in that, Andrew, is you've got the John Malkovich head scientist character constantly in conflict with the more political military figure of John Carell. And, you know, to some extent, I bet that happens. I bet there is those relationships all through the military.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. The bit I loved I think it's in the second episode, is John Malkovich is trying to get them not to launch. And he's being this really cynical, there's too much risk, the humidity's too high, and he's being really factual. And it's Steve Carell's character goes, well, I guessed you were playing it too safe when there wasn't a cloud in the sky and your scientist had an umbrella.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, and there's a difference between the parameters must be right and, even in engineering, there's always that conflict between, do we sit and plan it until it's perfect, or do we just build one, let it go wrong, and then build another one, and then another one? So, there's the two kind of schools of thought. But yeah, the frustration from a scientist's point of view, when he's got all the evidence, he knows what is the best in the ways of science, and then the military guys, but we want to do this anyway, and it must be very frustrating even for people like you when you just see a government, this one or previous or future, go against science.
I mean, and because I think there's an interesting point here, which isn't political, is the best science isn't always the best political choice. And that's something that, as a scientist, I can get really, really angry about some of the decisions I've seen made recently. But, my research has some idea of what's going on with the virus. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not hugely expert on it, but I have some idea of what we're talking about. But I know nothing about social behavior of people during epidemics.
That's true.
And there are people who know that better. And, they're social scientists. And then there's other types of people who are experts. And what a good leader should be able to do, in my opinion, is pull together all those different sources of information and come up with a solution. And that's not the same as doing exactly what scientist X tells you. That's making the right choice. And I presume the same thing happens in all things. Like a military leader, he can't know what's happening in every single area in a battlefield. So he will listen to the people he respects in the chain of command to formulate a strategy.
Look, I've been a section commander on a patrol in an area, and notoriously my map reading was awful, but I had like a specialist navigator guy who was there, and I just ended up trusting him completely. If he said it was that way, we're going that way. But as a scientist, you at least know which science is worth listening to. So that guy's got that credentials, he does this, I know him, I know his previous work, therefore I can be invested to some extent in what he says.
Yeah. There's also cause for the thing that scientists are also notoriously bad when they move outside their field.
Okay.
So they have a sort of extra confidence. And, currently with the current pandemic, I will totally admit there are many of us who have been on Twitter going, oh, you should do this. And then someone points out, you work on cancer, not coronavirus. Which is true. It's a fair criticism.
Fair enough. Look, it's 56 minutes, Matt. I think, do we have time? Have we got time to talk a little bit about the apron strings? Are you familiar with the term apron strings?
Me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Indeed, I
translates.
am.
Letting go of the egg. How are you for time, Dr. Holding? Are you okay?
I'm good.
Okay, good. Right, so here's the lay of the land we've got at the moment. We've got a 10-year-old who is really bright kid, but I don't know, what's the polite way? He's not very aware. You know, I guess you might call him ditzy if you wanted to be unkind. He's like he might
lacks situational awareness.
he does
Really is a
lack
good way to put
he
it.
does lack situational awareness, and he goes in.
It's a bit like having two kids in the room next door who know I'm on a podcast.
Yeah, oh no, that kind of thing. Oh no,
Very-
my boy, he walks into meetings all the time. You know, I've got the soundproof thing, done, and he'll just wander in. Dad, can you look at this maze I've made? I'm like, no, I'm on the thing. But yeah, so he lacks situational awareness. Like I said, bright kid, and he knows this. Even at school, they call it the Oscarness, where you kind of you either like you drift off or you bring out the wrong books for a thing, or you just go to the wrong classroom. But he's always deep in thought. He's a bright lad. I'm not going to take it against him. But because of that, we've always been a bit tighter on the apron strings of like when we would let him go out and about. So this is the first summer at age 10 where we've just started letting him even just go off around our local area on his bike. So the very first time we let him go out on his own, we heard a thump outside, and he just cycled straight into the neighbour's car. Just like, you go, what's happened? What's happened? He's like, oh, I don't know. It's like, well, normally I would be there with him going, dude, you're too close to the cars. That car's sticking out a bit. Cycle around it. So he's getting better, but first time, thump into the car. So, Matt.
How much did that cost your insurance?
Do you know what? We were lucky. It was the rubber handle of the thing. But he said to me, no, there's no damage. It's okay. It's okay. I said, I don't care. I don't give a crap whether there's damage or not. You're knocking on that person's door. You're explaining to him that you don't think there's damage, but that you were a dumbass and that you cycled into his car, and you're going to sit there while he inspects his car for damage, which was as embarrassing for me as it was for him, frankly. But the whole scary thing of having to knock on the neighbour's door, sorry, Mr. Henderson, I hit your car on the thing. And like we all remember that experience as kids of having to, knock and apologise. But yeah, so then he got sent on an errand to go and post something today. His little sister begged to go out with him. Not old enough, not aware enough at all. Against her better judgment, my wife just went, do you know what? I'm cooking, fine, go then. They come running back 5 minutes later. Little girl's done exactly the same thing, except across the other side of the estate. So little Vivi's gone and cycled her car into another thing. We're like, they're damaged. And I said, is there damage? Her reply was, no one saw. That was what no one saw. So the boy swears there's no damage. Investigation ongoing. But I was just wondering, do we think that like 8 or 9, do your kids go out and about on their own? Is my question to you, Dr. Holding.
So my 10-year-old has been walking himself to school for probably 2 years, but the
Really?
school is 5 minutes down the road.
Yeah, but still 5 minutes.
And I started by walking behind her by about 2 minutes, so I could see her just in the distance. And that was, to be honest, not just to see how she'd behave. And then we bought her a mobile phone. It's an old Nokia. Well, it's a new Nokia, but the one
Yeah.
that looks like the old one, because it keeps the internet away from her. And then she was allowed to start walking herself to the childminder after clubs. And then she had to text us. And it's for me, it's about giving her enough freedom to make mistakes, but whether those mistakes will not cause significant
like car damage.
But there's roads she has to cross. So I know it's quite a quiet area, but I've seen some of her driving outside the school. So it's like, no, you have to go in that gate. You're no way you're going across the front entrance because they're maniacs there. And then we, of course, get this is what I find really hard is her younger sister goes, but I want to walk with her. And you go, no,
yeah.
you two can't even use an Xbox together without someone getting grievous bodily harm. So you're not going to walk to school.
Well, this is it. It's not just the fact that the younger one is in a desperate hurry to catch up with the older one, which I keep having to explain. No, that's not how it works. But yeah, also the fact that they will bicker and argue, which causes its own problems, because then they're doing all those things that you're worried about them doing, but they're doing it in a state of being upset and agitated.
And there's the other, as a parent, the thing I notice is that responsibility you get as a parent is terrifying. So why would I want to give my 10-year-old responsibility for an 8-year-old?
Of the 8-year-old.
That's just I'm not ready for that at my age. So, and that is something the 10-year-old doesn't get. She goes, I'll look after my sister. I'll be fine. You go, no, you don't know what that means.
Have you got 2 girls?
2 girls, yeah.
Oh, you and Matt both outnumbered. I can't imagine what that's like. At least I've got the lads. When the girls are going full off, Like, here we go. I'll be sexist here, aren't I? But, got a bit of backup in the house. Like, you guys, you are just lone wolves.
It's fine. It's chill.
Doesn't seem it. Doesn't seem chill. But New York, Matt, I remember when we've been doing this long enough now, I remember you talking about your daughter taking her first, subway.
Yeah,
subway. Trip. And like, no, I can't imagine that. Just going, all right, off you go to the next town or whatever.
Yeah, well, it's public transport is a fact of life. And when we graduated from elementary school, so we go elementary, middle, high school here in New York, and she walked herself to school, but school wasn't even 5 minutes away. School was like, I could hit it with a baseball away. She had to cross a road, but there's a crossing guard. And then I think when she got to be about, like around that 9 or 10, it was the same thing. We'd send her on little errands to the grocery store, which is just around the corner. She actually didn't have to cross the street to get there. She could just like walk around the edges of a square. And then in middle school, suddenly she has to get on a bus and take the bus to school. And it's a public bus. It's not a school bus that picks her up. She has to go wait at a bus stop. Unfortunately, she had friends she would meet most mornings. So we got to be pretty good and chill with that. But then when she went to high school, now it's a 45-minute plus train ride that involves switching trains at basically rush hour. And I remember doing that ride for the first week and, okay, I think I'm ready to go. And man, I don't remember about how much longer it was after that. We get the phone call, I don't know where I am. I'm nowhere near the school and I'm going to be late. And the thing is not, she wasn't upset that she was lost. She was upset she was going to be late for school and was in a near panic about it. And we're like, okay, hang on.
Please be scared that you're lost.
Where you are.
Please be more scared that you're lost. Please. Interesting. Andrew saying, he followed behind. I've had that with my boy on the bike. We use the Bluetooth headsets from the karting events. I've adapted them into headsets so that I can be like, a good 100 meters behind and just still be able to say stop and have him stop. I'll end with Matt Cook's comment, which is, I went to pick up my 14-year-old from somewhere. 14, I missed that when I read it. I was waiting on a very busy road for him. I watched him walk straight across the road without lifting his head from his phone, and I nearly panicked myself, says Matt. At 14, like even at 10, I was saying to my son, I said, look, he's really bad at crossing the road. He'll just have blank moments. And I said to him, like, at 10, it's not all the way my fault anymore. At 10, if you walk into the road and get hit, it's kind of your fault now. Like 10, you can go to jail for committing a crime or like kiddie jail. You're definitely responsible if you get hit crossing the road. Start paying attention. And it was only a few months ago, I think on this podcast, Matt, I was telling you that he went across a supermarket road just without looking, completely without looking. So I gave him remedial crossing the road lessons when we got home. I stood there at the side of the road and made him look both ways, left and right, listen, look, listen, everything, cross the road 40 times. I made him do 40 crossings of the road.
He just thinks you're a dick now.
Huh? Say again?
He just thinks bad things of you.
Yeah, good. Safe for work, Dr. Andrew. It's okay, it's fine. One of these buttons will cover it up. One of these buttons is a buzz.
Oh, no.
Nah. There we go. Here we go.
Oh, no. You missed the apex.
Yeah, you don't understand that because you don't listen to my Formula One show. How dare you? You're a man of science, Dr. Holding.
I was going to say the weird and long end of that tale of my child getting lost on her way to school is that now she will casually, but in the before times, she would casually say, oh, I'm going to visit my friend in some entirely other borough. Okay, how are you going to get there? Train. Okay. And that's it. She just goes.
And she goes.
And now she does. She just, her friends just go everywhere by the train, and it's amazing, and I'm proud, but I'm also constantly terrified.
So I started going by public transport to school at 13, and I used to catch a half-an-hour train journey and a 50-minute bus journey. And I never thought anything of it. It's just what I had to do. And I remember going to my first... So I was going to school in Croydon, and I remember going to my first gigs in London. So I think it was Wembley at 14, 15. And that was in the evening.
Who was it?
And my parents would never let me out of the house. But because my dad liked music when he had been a teenager, for some reason, the discussion happened out closed doors. They said, oh, you can go to music gigs. That's fine. Nothing else I would have been allowed to do. So I had never I just enjoyed it really.
It's interesting. There's definitely differences. I mean, yeah, when I was my boy's age at 10, the streets were my oyster. I could get on my bike, leave the house, go to any friend's house, go into the town centre, lock my bike up, go hang around in town all day. And I just can't imagine it. I cannot imagine waving him out the door in the morning, or him just going, "No, it's Saturday, I'm just off," and then he's like goes a couple of towns over on his bike. I don't know if that's me and my change of attitude and my change of demographic. I don't know, or maybe it's just the times, or maybe it's that people just didn't care as much in the olden days and weren't as aware of the dangers. Maybe the dangers haven't changed, but we're more aware of them. Either way, yeah, it's a slow progress for my boy at the moment, but he's getting there. Dr. Holding, thank you so much for joining us. Matt, I know, and you have both been desperate to talk more about science movies. So what can I extend an invitation to you next Thursday, and we'll do like a full-on sci-fi, not even necessarily science, just like science films we like and why we like them. Science fiction, I guess.
If I'm free, because I have no idea what my calendar's next week, I'm definitely there. If not, we'll probably remove what's in my calendar. There we go.
Exactly. This is more important. Get your priorities straight. At Andrew Holding on Twitter, yeah? That's where you hang out. Yep. How did your Indiana Jones thing go?
It went well.
Your live streaming to raise money?
Yeah, so we live streamed Indiana Jones to raise money for Cancer Research UK, and we raised over £300. There was a mildly awkward moment where people were basically bidding whether the second character, Sophia, should live or die by giving donations, which was really awkward, but also a really good way to make money. So
And did she live? Did she die?
She survived. She lived by about 1 penny, because people are stingy and they were like, £3, 1 pence.
That's really good. I like that. Well, I'm glad it raised
good.
some money, and do let us know if you can do anything like that. Again, a live watch along of Dr. Holding playing a computer game to raise money, which is great. So at Andrew Holding on Twitter. Matt is at MattPT55.
Yep, you got it.
We do another podcast about Formula One, which we're going to do on Sunday. But the thing is, Matt, we now know there is definitely going to be races starting in July. So we've only actually got 3 non-race related shows left after, how long have we been doing this without a race now? About 7 months without a race.
November, right? What was it? November was the last race.
Yeah.
End of November.
So. I think we've done all right, to be honest, to keep putting out relevant, interesting content. I've never at any point thought, oh gosh, what are we going to talk about? It's just been a sandbox to play in, and I've loved it. But boy, do I want some races back.
It's going to be fun. Looking forward to it.
And you can follow me at Spanners Ready and the show at Indoors Remain. And still think that's likely to be the safest thing to do. Please look after yourselves. I'm not your mum or anything, but going to a crowded beach doesn't seem like an amazing idea. And I pressed a different button, which stops the intro for a bit. Oh, how much of that cut out? Should I start again? No, it's too late. Work hard, be kind, have fun. Remain indoors. Yeah, that didn't go well, that end bit. So look, I've got new toy syndrome. It's got a pre-fade on it. You know how like in a radio station or something, you can press like pre-fade and it doesn't go out. You just hear it so you can test a track or even speak to someone on the phone and it doesn't go out. I've got all that. I've got all that on this desk now, but it's so fancy. I just leant on it. I leant on it with the back of my hand and it cut the outro music out, I think. Anyway, or maybe it didn't. What would be worse is if it didn't cut the outro music, it just cut it out in my headphones, and then now I just seem like a madman saying the music's gone and it's still there. That's probably the worst case scenario.
And this is why you need a multi-track recorder, because then you can just edit your one feed.
Yes, and I've got that now. And I tell you what, insulting me puts you in timeout. Bye. Okay, good. Thank you very much for your time. Great fun. And Matt, I will see you on Sunday. Oh, Friday. No, tomorrow. iRacing.
Yeah, well, we're doing that too. We didn't talk about it, but yeah, we're doing the iRacing thing.
Good. And Matt is really... Tune in, because Matt is fast, and it's really annoying me. It's genuinely upsetting me. So look
I think
out for
you
that.
got slower. I don't think I got
You should
that.
teach me to race at some point. It would be hilarious.
Get the kit. We will teach you to race. Absolutely.
I mean, the trouble is, the only kit I've got is, amateur game stuff.
Yeah.
So
No,
You
you
have to
need
invest some in equipment.
use your fancy doctor money. But yeah. No, I don't think I have got slow, but I promise you, Matt is my biggest target for the event, so I will be throwing absolutely everything at trying to hang on. We'll see you later, guys. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to stop the stream. I've got no fancy way to stop the stream. Bye.